Thank you for joining us. We're back this time talking on the key findings on mental health and suicide from the Royal Commission. Joined again by Dr. Peggy Brown, former Royal Commissioner, and Professor Harry McConnell, neuropsychiatrist. Today's episode is the root causes of the mental health challenges and suicide among veterans that came out of the Commission.
Well, a couple of things I would say. Obviously, the prevalence of mental health issues and suicide in veterans was a significant finding. And the other thing I would say is that they're not necessarily absolutely linked. It's not that the suicidality and suicide was just because people experience mental health challenges. The suicidality and suicide were linked to other issues as well as mental health challenges. Essentially, I guess the key finding of the Royal Commission around what was causing the mental health and suicidality was about the traumas that people experience, and it starts in defence. And at the outset of the Royal Commission, Defence had a view that service was protective. Now, there was a reason they saw it as protective, and yes, that had some validity. But essentially, they saw the problem as occurring when people left service and the challenges of post-service life. We were able to demonstrate fairly clearly, I think, that there is a strong association with the harms that occur during service. Now, some of those harms are related to the experience of being in warlike zones and combat, but by no means was that the majority of the issue. It was very much around really the what we call micro traumas, the day-to-day traumas of service life, whether it's about what you experience during training, the frequent postings and the disconnection from your family and supports that comes with that, often a sense of isolation, the harshness of the experiences in service. We heard an awful lot about assaults and abuse of all different kinds. There was physical abuse, sexual abuse. We heard a lot of sexual abuse, but bullying, harassment, discrimination, racism, stigma, just so prevalent. And every single time that happens, it adds to a person's kind of, harm, I guess. And ultimately, it's that which was causing a lot of I think, the mental health challenges and certainly the suicidality and suicide. Oh, look, I think there's no doubt that the majority of people that we spoke to did not anticipate the extent of the kind of abuse and harm that they experienced during service. Now, I have to stress, this is not everybody. And there are many positive aspects of service. And I do want to present that side of it as well, because people do get a lot out of service. Even when they've experienced the harms, they still really deeply value the sense of purpose, the identity it gives them, the comradeship, that sense of being part of a team, of doing something for their nation, all of which is a really positive thing. But yes, most people did not expect, I think, how harsh and at times alienating service life could be. And for some, that it really led to some significant consequences.
Yeah, I think moral injury is such a common and such an important part of the experience of not of every veteran, but of many veterans. And it often goes unrecognized, but it cuts at the core of a person. It cuts at your core beliefs, your core values. A moral injury is not just a trauma related to a war. A moral injury can occur on so many levels. where there is a discordance with your own personal values, because the values that you have and the expectations that you have as a soldier in combat go contrary to how we live in general society, and contrary to the individual values that most of us grow up with, and our own internal value systems. To try to reconcile that is very problematic, but particularly in the clear incidence of killing, which obviously in day-to-day society is against everybody's values. But that's the job of a soldier. And so to try to come to terms with that is very complex. But it also comes with at a much lower level as well, because there is a sense of betrayal sometimes by men, betrayal by their leaders in the defense, betrayal by their country, betrayal by the whole situation, watching the situations around them that just go against, so it's very common, for example, that they would see civilians or animals massacred and be unable to do anything about it. And that's a very difficult thing to do, even though they're not committing anything against their own morals. They're in a position where they're actually watching and witnessing things that clearly go against their own morals, and in a powerless position to do anything about it. And to try to come to terms with that inside yourself is very challenging. And I think that does relate to the suicidality of a lot of veterans, because that's really going against who you are as a person, what you really believe, and what your meaning of life that you have here on this planet.
I think, I was saying before about the harshness of service life, and Harry's talked about there, particularly in a kind of combat situation and what you might experience. But, I was talking about assaults. For example, during the Royal Commission, we heard multiple accounts of sexual assaults, men and women. And that's the moral injury came there because it was that sense of, how can this happen? I'm with my comrades, they should have my back, they should be looking after me, and yet this has happened, and then it seems like a blind eye's been turned, or I'm the one that's then victimised and the perpetrator seems to be getting off scot-free. So that sense of feeling betrayed by the institution can come in multiple different circumstances, including in a non-combat zone. Yes, well, we did have a chapter, I think, on moral injury, and we certainly made a recommendation that there needed to, both Defence and DVA working together, need to look at ways to prevent, minimise and then treat moral injury. I think it's fair to say moral injury is still something of an emerging concept. It has just last month in September 2025 been recognised in the DSM-5 TR as a new Z code, so it's not a clinical diagnosis, but there is now recognition that it's something that needs to be taken into account, along with other, spiritual and ethical kind of moral issues. So in terms of what we recommended, we thought there was more that could be done during service to actually try and prevent moral injury. And, if there is a circumstance that you can't prevent, such as being in a combat zone and witnessing things, there's things that can be done at the time that can help to minimise it. Then for those who do experience moral injury, and sometimes it takes a while to essentially kind of become evident, then there needs to be more available in terms of treatment. And that in itself is still a developing field. There's both, I think, clinical aspects, but then also kind of more spiritual, or religious, ethical aspects as well, and both need to be addressed.
I think the treatment component is very important. So once you do recognise it, there are some very specific types of psychotherapies geared towards moral injury, which can be very, very helpful for the veteran to deal with that. And it's very different than the normal approach to just clinical PTSD. This is not, there's no medication that's just going to fix this. This takes a different approach to psychotherapy. So there are numerous types of moral injury specific psychotherapies. And you need to treat concurrently if there's PTSD or depression associated with that as well. But if you don't treat the moral injury itself, then they're left with that inside them. And I think that things like suicidality can still persist, even if you are successful in treating many of the other symptoms that go with PTSD, for example. And the spiritual aspect of that is also very important. Whether you're religious or not, everyone has some sort of spiritual concept of why we're here, what it's all about, what is the meaning of life, so to speak. And you've got to sort of help the veteran incorporate their moral injury into a belief system that allows them to carry on and to have meaning in life. Well, I mean, frequently people will get withdrawn, and you're right, it's not just veterans, it's not just people who've done combat who suffer moral injury, and even people who've never gone overseas, veterans who've never gone overseas suffer moral injury from things that just happen in Australia within the system, assaults, sexual assaults, etc. Healthcare professionals, moral injury is very common, particularly first responders. And you've got to look for, I think, a common with moral injury is a personal withdrawal. And I think that's one of the key signs that you see. It's not the positive signs like you see in PTSD. It's not really all about the things like the nightmares, hypervigilance, flashbacks. It's not those sort of positive signs. It's the negative signs that I worry about. People withdraw from society, they withdraw from the community, they withdraw from their friends, they withdraw from their families. And that's where it's really important to try to reach out. And it's a very difficult thing to reach out and to get people to talk about the moral injury because it is such a profound personal and individual experience.
The Royal Commission didn't make recommendations specifically about that, as you would appreciate, with the breadth of what we had to cover and the need to contain the recommendations to a doable number. We tried to limit the number of specific recommendations. But I think in terms of answering your question, there is a role there for, peers to be involved as well as clinicians and, spiritual or religious leaders, etc., in offering the opportunity for people to actually engage. That awareness, as Harry was saying, I think what families can do is be aware of the possibility and what the signs might be, and then to be able to support someone to actually get to the point of saying, I think I do need some help. That's a big step. And yes, and sometimes peers can play a role in that because oftentimes people think they're the only one. They feel very alone with their experience, don't want to talk about it, don't see it in others. And just that knowledge that someone can reach out, put on a warm hand and say, are you okay? Do you need to talk? There is help available is so important.
Well, I would like to thank Peggy and Harry for joining us today.
Thank you.